Good afternoon. The September 8th, 2022 board work session is now in order. Mr. Gibbs, roll call, please.
Ms. Belford,
Present.
Ms. McDougall,
Present.
Mr. Susan,
Present.
Ms. Jenkins,
Present.
Ms. Campbell.
Present.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. During today's work session, we'll be receiving 3 updates. Sue, Assistant Superintendent of Facility Services, will begin with our first topic regarding a middle school financing and planning update. She will then proceed to present the second topic of preliminary boundary changes information. Ms. Hand.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to run those 2 topics together, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly just to kind of give you an update on where we are with the new middle school project, and then I'll talk a little bit about attendance boundaries at the end. So first of all, just to go through where we are with the milestones for the new middle school, the board had previously approved contracts for design and for construction management, so both of those are under contract. The design is being actively worked right now. We've had numerous meetings with our stakeholders in terms of what the building will look like, what types of classrooms we'll have, and those types of things. So we've been working through all of the stakeholder engagement with our secondary leading and learning folks. We've also been doing some extensive engagement with the Brevard County Emergency Management folks. There's a requirement for the school board to build to enhanced hurricane protection standards, and we've been working through that with them. You'll see on your agenda tonight a partial exemption. We've negotiated what they need versus the full gamut of EHPA standards, and so I feel very confident that we are both meeting the needs of the Brevard County Emergency Management folks as well as trying to minimize the cost to the school district. So I feel like that's a great partnership, and we've done very well with them and appreciate their cooperation with us. So we're working through completion of the design documents through the fall, and then on the board agenda in December will be a guaranteed maximum price proposal for early works. And that is significant because we need to get started on the site work and also order long lead time material and equipment, things like mechanical equipment, chillers, those kinds of things, as well as big electrical transformers and things that have been taking a long time. So it's important that we get those under contract. And so in order to get those under contract no later than December, I want to make sure that we're still on track for the financing piece of the middle school so that those 2 things can happen concurrently. The construction proposal for the middle school will be for the board in early spring, and anticipate doing the full construction contract probably in March. But the key start date that we need to keep in mind is the December early works contract for the middle school. So we have been refining the construction cost estimate. One of the advantages of having the construction manager under contract concurrently with the designer is that they can work hand in hand. And so we get fairly regular updates on the construction costs. This is a schematic estimate for the middle school. It is not based on full construction documents yet, but this is a pretty good number, and we've vetted it pretty carefully and feel very confident that this is about where we're going to land when we bring the full construction contract to the board in the future. The furniture, fixture, and equipment estimate is about $2 million, and so we're estimating a total of about $51 million, but we've also included some wiggle room for cost escalation. So our construction manager gave us a couple different parameters around cost escalation, and so for the purpose of estimating cost where we are today and kind of figuring out how we might fund the project, we're looking at about a $55 million project for the purpose of estimating. Fully expect that the total will be less than that, but that's the number that we're using for the purposes of where we are today. The early works GMP that the board will see in December, estimate that will be about $10 to $11 million, and we can cover that with the impact fees that we've already collected. So we basically have that in the bank and can handle the early works GMP in December. So as we briefed you in, I believe it was March, we talked about the subtleties of how we have to contract for the middle school or any capital project. So when we contract, we have to have the resources available to write a purchase order for the full amount. So if we don't have the cash available, cannot write a purchase order for $55 million. We need to be able to support that. And so in looking through our cash flow, which I'll demonstrate in a few minutes, we will not have the cash flow available in March to be able to contract for the full amount of the middle school cost. From a cash flow perspective, as I mentioned previously, we have the pay application process. So the contractor builds parts of the school, we get billed every month. So we have a cash flow of money going out, and then we also have educational impact fees coming in at the same time. So in terms of our cash flow, we estimate that our peak deficit will probably be somewhere around 15 million. Might be less, might be a little bit more, but assuming all other things remain constant that we're thinking about now, from a cash flow perspective, we estimate that that's probably about the peak deficit that we'll see through the life of the program, where our need to pay the bills exceeds the accrued educational impact fees at any given time. So this slide gives you kind of a sense of where we are with our educational impact fees and the anticipated expenditures. We will be contracting for the Viera Classroom Edition project. That is also on the board agenda tonight. And then we anticipate receiving impact fees from the June 30th collection. Those should be coming in shortly. They've been through the entire process and have been approved by the County Commission. And then we repeat that process quarterly, and for the purposes of estimating, we're using $4 million per quarter that would be recommended to allocate for this project. So using that as a cash flow, and you work through the timing of the impact fee collections versus the timing of our contracting for the middle school, you can see at the bottom of the slide, we estimate that there's probably somewhere in the $23 million range that will need some short-term financing. Now, keep in mind, impact fee revenues can vary, costs can vary, so this number can go up or down, but it gives you a sense of about where we are in terms of financing needs. So in looking at the funding framework, we've been working very closely with the Finance Department and Ford & Associates, our financial advisors. Mr. Ford is here today, and he's going to explain the details of this a lot better than I will, but one of the parameters under which we work is the cost per student station limits that the state has imposed upon us in statute. And there are only 2 exceptions to meeting that cost per student station requirement, and those are projects that are funded 100% with impact fees or projects that are subject to a lease purchase agreement. And I'm going to ask Mr. Ford if he could comment a little bit in more detail on that, and then we'll talk a little bit about our math on the cost per student station.
Certainly. Cost per student station limits in Florida, thank you for having me, by the way. Cost per student station limits have been around for quite a long time, but they really got teeth with a change in law in 2017. And that was the point at which this section of the law was changed that prohibits the use of funds from any source to pay for any portion of a facility that goes above those limits. Problematically, the cost per student station limits were never perfect, but they have utterly failed to keep pace with the cost of construction, especially over the last 2-year period. So it's very problematic for a lot of school districts. And the exceptions to that rule were schools that were contracted for architectural and engineering services before, I think it was July 1st, 2017. It's no longer applicable. They added the exception later for schools that can be funded 100% with impact fees. It does say in the law, completely funded or totally funded. I can't remember the exact vernacular, but it is clear that it's 100%. And the final exception is schools that are financed through a lease purchase agreement. And that leads us to certificates of participation, which are lease purchase financings. They also happen to be the most common form of financing for Florida school districts. So that's where they come in the picture. This has caused a lot of school districts to use COPs in place of other forms of financing, say sales tax revenue bonds or general obligation bonds, both of which would be backed by an additional voter-approved tax, whereas COPs are typically paid from local capital outlay taxes that are already in place in every district in the state as well as other sources of revenues as applicable to the particular district. Sue, do you want me to take the page 7?
So the next slide shows you our calculations relative to the cost per student station limitations based on the costs that we have today and using those estimates. So the limitations imposed in the Florida DOE cost per student station requirement is $29,950 per student station. We have 1,002 student stations planned in the middle school. That generates about a $30 million limit for our construction. And so you can see based on our estimates that we are not close. And this is not a function of we're building an extraordinarily expensive school. This is a function of this is what construction costs are today. And so it's not something that we can value engineer our way out of. And as Mr. Ford said, other school districts are experiencing the exact same thing where this is just not a realistic limitation. However, that puts us in a position where we have no choice but to use certificates of participation other than to just wait until we have accumulated sufficient educational impact fees. Those are basically the two choices. So John, if you could talk a little bit about the certificates of participation and the bank loans.
Sure.
Please.
Going a little bit deeper into COPs, and Brevard Schools already has COPs outstanding, so you may be somewhat familiar with them. These are, again, lease purchase instruments. You pay for the facility over time, and there is no specific pledge of a particular revenue, like a sales tax revenue bond, again. These are subject to annual appropriation by the school board. Every year as part of your budget, the school board will vote to appropriate funds to continue making lease payments on your existing and any new COPs. And it's done on an all or one basis, meaning that the school board must appropriate for payments on all of the COPs or on none of them. They're all tied together, and that gives them considerably greater credit strength than if they were singular. Again, usually paid from local capital outlay millage. They can also be paid from other revenue sources as legal sales taxes, impact fees. We've even seen operating funds used in a couple of transactions over the past couple of decades, but that's very rare. COPs can be issued for a term of up to 30 years in the state of Florida. You cannot go anywhere beyond that. And they're typically issued either via negotiated public offering or through a direct loan from a commercial bank, the latter of which is what we're discussing here today. This does meet the exception for that third cost per student station branch. And here I think we've been looking for a, that's about it. Going to bank loans. Bank loans is the method by which you would issue the debt. It does not affect the security structure. That's the same. So when you go through a public offering, your staff would put together a very large prospectus. They would go through the rating process. They would hire a disclosure counsel. They would hire one or more underwriters. The underwriters would have their own counsels. And the process would take probably 120 days, assuming it moved, relatively efficiently. A bank loan is a simpler process. It would be, I believe, competitively bid. Banks from all over the state and elsewhere would be allowed to submit terms, conditions, and pricing for making the loan to Brevard schools. In addition, banks have widely different views of prepayment provisions and what they might be willing to offer. So some banks might say you cannot prepay this debt over time. Others would say you can prepay it at any time without penalty. And there's obviously a very large spectrum of possibility in between those two positions. For this debt, we would be looking for and hoping to get a loan that allowed for more rapid and less expensive prepayment. So that's a priority for Brevard. Bank loans would limit you to a shorter term of financing, probably in the 10 to 12, maybe 15-year category, but we've been talking shorter here, 5 to 10 years. So prepared to take any questions on COPs or bank loans if you have any.
Any board member have any questions for Mr. Ford on COPs or bank loans? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, is that, we had this conversation last time around, and talked about, borrow as little as possible, pay as off as quickly as possible, but when you, as you're working with other school districts around the state, are you seeing those kinds of terms that we've talked about as our priority in any other districts?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's fairly consistent from bank to bank. Certain banks will propose there's one bank that's always going to propose with a very rigid prepayment provision. They're not going to deviate from it. There's others that will give you more flexibility. And there's one that always just says, hey, you can prepay this at any time, without penalty. It's just as part of their practice. And their internal machinations allow them to do that or prohibit them from doing that, whatever the case may be.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ford, could you speak to the issue of cost per student station with regard to the direction that was given at the state level for that to be reanalyzed, recalculated? Because I think that's an important point as well.
There is a section of the law that says that the Department of Education will, and I cannot remember the exact verbiage, but essentially reassess cost per student station limits as of January 1st of 2020, I believe is the date, and revise and republish at that time. To my knowledge, that has not occurred yet, and that may be why it's unreflective of the costs that we've seen over the last couple of years. Although it's entirely possible that had they done that by January 1st of 2020, it would remain unreflective of the somewhat extraordinary circumstances we've had since then.
Super, thank you. Anything else from anyone? Thank you, Mr. Ford.
Thank you. The next slide just gives you the range of the estimated interest rate, the estimated interest cost, the annual debt service cost, kind of the framework of the parameters of those things that we're looking to finance under. So estimating 30 million as kind of just a ballpark number. If we were to borrow 30 million, looking at about 3.5% interest rate. And these are the numbers that show what that would generate in terms of interest costs for a 5-year and a 10-year loan. Doesn't take into account our ability to prepay and how that might affect the interest costs. I just wanted to give you a sense of this is kind of these are the parameters under which we would be considering borrowing for the middle school. But the bottom line is, after we've worked with our finance department and worked with Mr. Ford's office, we are recommending that we go forward with a bank loan with a prepayment option. So as we're proceeding with that, we would be developing a request for qualifications, request for proposals that reflects those parameters. So in summary, I think there's two options for the middle school. There's the same two options that we looked at back in March, and those are the short-term financing option and opening the middle school in August of 2024, and then the pay-as-you-go option that would move it out to at least August of 2025, if not August of 2026. And there's risks on both sides of those options. With pay-as-you-go, we certainly have the risk of construction cost escalation. You have the benefit of no interest cost, but potentially we would lose student enrollment under that option. So we're still recommending that we proceed and use the short-term financing method to get us under construction with the middle school starting in December with the early works GMP. The timing of the project for opening in August of 2024, this is more or less a compilation of what I believe to be the board actions will be surrounding the middle school over the next several months. So in December, we will have the early works GMP, and then we will need, in order to approve that early works GMP, a firm commitment on the financing. Because I'm absolutely not comfortable going forward with the investment in early works without having the commitment to contract for the remainder of the project. So that's the time during which we will need to make a definite decision on the financing. In talking with Mr. Ford, there's a number of different vehicles to do that. So we'll be looking at the best way to bring that structure to the board and get the board's consideration of the financing approval in December. In January, I would anticipate coming to the board in workshop session to talk about the attendance boundary changes that would go with the new middle school. We're going to need to start thinking about that, and in facilities planning, we've done a fair amount of work looking at that already, but until we are ready to go, we really don't want to get too far into that discussion. So I would anticipate early in the year we'll start talking about the middle school boundaries. In February, we would anticipate, again, final approval of the financing if we need that for whatever structure we've chosen, and then start the information agenda process for the attendance boundary changes. In March, we would be approving the construction contract and scheduling the public hearing around the attendance boundary changes, and then in April, approving the boundary changes. So The other thing that this does is gives the public an opportunity to participate in the boundary change process in a time period that is not during the holidays. Our typical process, just by virtue of the fact that we have to have it done, is through the fall, and for something that is this complicated, I think we're much better off to have that time frame in the spring where the public can really engage, and we're not worried about who's out of town for Thanksgiving and other holidays. So I think that works better from that perspective as well. And then if you'd like, we can take any questions on the middle school, and then I just want to run through the boundary changes real quickly proposed for this coming school year.
Mr. Susan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could, I know this kind of shift gears, but I wanted to go through, there's some things that we're not talking about here that are pertinent to the reason for exploring finance. And I may ask Jonathan to come up because we've spoken about this along with a lot of the other construction contractors. But currently right now, just so you guys know, construction costs this year alone are inwards of 10 to 14% inflated, right? They're going to inflate the prices by 10 to 14%, which if we did not make the decision to do the financing, would increase this between $5 and $7 million just to build next year. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. Which far exceeds the interest that would be on top of this loan. The other thing that that is on top of this is we are sending 10 buses over the causeways to fill Delora Middle Schools for the attendance at Delora Middle School. When Arby and I did the numbers back in the day, that was the transportation director, the amount of revenue that it costs to run those 10 buses because they're starting in one place, driving back, picking up, and driving back over the top, was inwards of close to $500,000 in fuel and everything else throughout the year. The diesel fuel alone this year has inflated by 44%. And that's right now. That's not like what it did a couple weeks ago and then started coming down a little bit. So if you're starting to put the cost factors of 1 year's worth of waiting versus the amount that it would cost to offset going out to revenue, it far exceeds it. And the other opportunity is, I mean, like aluminum shapes, which makes up a lot of the strapping inside of a lot of the concrete and stuff like that, that's up 18%. Copper's up 16%. So you're seeing inflated numbers coming across. And then I wanted to speak to, is there anything that I need to add to that? Did I do a good job? Okay. Anything I'm saying is kind of weird. But then I also pulled up ABC, Associated Builders and Contractors, and they have like red hot alerts right now that are going out every month talking about the increase of construction costs on inflation right now and what that's doing to the industry. One of the good things is that when I spoke to the realtors and some of the other groups that are involved in new construction, whether that's locally in the commercial market or residential, there's no indicator that Brevard will slow down, meaning that our impact fee money will continue to come in. So there's the fear of us not bringing in impact money. That's not even on the horizon for anything. The cost of construction, along with the cost of running those buses, is becoming extremely costly. Plus, the last piece, which I wanted to say, is that the amount of manpower that we could save, because we're getting a presentation later on bus routes and how many we've been able to consolidate and all that stuff. Being able to reduce our fleet by 10 bus runs over a causeway frees up significantly, not only 10 bus rides, but we all know that we've got buses right now going, then coming back and going. If you look at the length of that bus ride, that's like 3 bus rides for somebody that's within a normal school zone. So it's a very positive thing in other ways. Sometimes we don't get into the numbers. So did I miss anything there? And then there's the fact that, which is great, is we'll be competing with charters and we'll be bringing in more revenue because we'll have more FTEs attending. So it's good all the way around. So if anybody wants to make an argument against bringing in money versus how much revenue it'll produce, there you have it. Thank you, Sue.
Just to follow up on that, I know you guys were being conservative with the impact fees at estimating the $4 million, but I mean, it's been pretty high over the last, and I know you don't necessarily designate the total, all of the impact fees towards one project, because we are still stashing things away for the South End Elementary School. We've needed to be, we will have paid off the Viera addition at that time, but what typically are we actually stashing away for this? Have we been over the last several quarters for this particular project?
It's been running between 3.5 and 5. The last quarter was at 6, but that was because we had reallocated some money that fell to the bottom line on a previous project.
All right.
So,
And similar things could happen. If we can get out of the Viera addition for less than $10 million, anything that's left from that could be put
Right.
towards the payment on the debt or just towards the cash flow of it, correct? Okay.
yes, ma'am.
No, I'm in agreement with you, Mr. Susan. I think this is the time, not knowing what the future is going to hold. You know, honestly, could we get it done in 6 months? You know, can't do that because then we could have some of those savings and that impact sooner. But I think, you know, as much as I don't like the idea of us taking on any more debt, taking on this type of debt that we know we've got the income coming in regularly, we know we can pay it off. We're going to try to contract to be able to pay it off early.
This isn't one of the debts that we see that we've had in the past.
Right, this isn't
What,
strapping us with 30.
going out and taking on, which we had spoken about previously, about what occurred earlier before any of ours, is that they went out and just decided to go out to take bonds out and everything else for extensions of 30, 40 years in massive amounts. This is, and I've had a conversation with Sue about this is something that we can pay off earlier and get it done and actually come out ahead in revenue and savings rather than that. And we've done that in previous where we've re-signed all of our, because of different interest rates and stuff like that with our bonds recently over the last couple of years to get better leverage as far as that goes. So, thank you.
Anything else on middle school before we move to boundary? And Ms. Hand, do you need anything from the board today on this?
No, ma'am, I think our recommendation and our intent is to just continue carrying on, and we'll bring additional information and actions back to the board in December.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'd just like to ask for clarification because a lot of work has to happen moving forward in preparation for December. Is there board consensus to follow, for us to continue with my recommendation to continue to pursue opening 24 in school year August of 24 with the understanding that we would have to finance some of that construction or the parameters that Sue has presented? Just want to get complete board consensus.
Absolutely.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. So the attendance boundary portion of the presentation is very light. I just wanted to remind everyone that we did adopt attendance boundary changes for school year 23-24 back in January. So we gave folks 2 years notice, and those are boundary changes: Apollo to Imperial, Heritage to Bayside, and Delora and Satellite to Cocoa Beach. So those have already been done, and we implemented the processes that were approved as part of that action back in January. For this year's cycle, we basically have 2 cleanup changes proposed in the Viera area, and those are, one is O'Galley to Viera High School, and this affects 6 lots in the southern tip of Pangea. Back when we drew boundaries, there was nothing there, so there were kind of straight lines, and now they're going through potential, living rooms. So we didn't want to create the situation where, somebody who's in bedroom A has got to go to Viera and bedroom B goes to O'Galley. So, so we're proposing to move the southern tip of that subdivision into Viera High School. There will likely be other boundary changes coming up in the future, but we will look at those in the context of the middle school boundary changes. And then the second one affects no students. These are just, again, cleanup lines to avoid going through the middle of subdivisions. Both of the subdivisions affected are 55 and older, so there's no students. We just want to make it a cleaner line. So as we go forward doing middle school boundaries, this line makes some sense. So those are the 2 that we will be putting forward through the entire process. So you'll see those again on the information agenda, and then scheduling the public hearing in December and the action in January. And I believe that's all.
Thank you, Ms. Han. Anyone have anything else? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The last topic for our workshop today is a millage update that will be presented by Dr. Mullins.
Thank you, Mr. Ford.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ford.
Welcome to head out, or you're welcome to stay. Thank you, Sue.
You didn't have to get up so eagerly, Mr. Ford. You could have,
Well, good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity just to provide the board and our community an update on the progress toward the steps forward in the anticipated millage ballot item presented to our community on November 8th. I want to start by really highlighting and celebrating the amazing men and women across our organization that are really ultimately responsible for the greatness we've been able to achieve as a district. The opportunities we've been able to provide our students, the continued graduation rate growth we've seen across our schools and across all of our subgroups, the sustainable acceleration opportunities we provided our students, graduating well over 80% of our high school seniors every year with advanced credentials in addition to their high school diploma. So, but the reality is behind that success are people who are elevating and raising up our kids to have the opportunities, one, but not just have the opportunity, but to achieve within that opportunity. And this gives us a really nice glimpse of the men and women across our organization. It takes all of us working together and coming together to support our kids and make that happen. And I would highlight that Brevard Public Schools continues to have one of the highest, most experienced teaching staff in the state. And I would offer and state confidently that that experience yields greatness. And we're very pleased, proud, and blessed to have experienced, talented master educators working in front of our students. This gives you kind of a personal face and glimpse of some of our celebrated heroes, some of our celebrated educators in Brevard. We're going to bring a couple of them to our board meeting this evening and celebrate them formally in public. Our amazing principal, Blair Lovelace, who took her, I'm going to steal some of the show tonight, but that's all right. We can't celebrate it enough. So proud of Blair and her team at Coquina Elementary School. When she became the principal there a few years ago, they had earned a D as a school, and even through COVID, rose above the challenges and earned a B last year as a school. So very proud of her and very excited to submit her as a candidate to the state as Principal of the Year. I'm going to speak it into existence. I suspect she will be a candidate as a state of Florida Principal Leader finalist when the state gets done evaluating, because she has done a tremendous job. But also our Teacher of the Year last year, Alex Wicker. If you want to go see some amazing science instruction with 7th graders, she left as a forest ranger teaching random folks about the wonderful parks and forest preserves we have to investing in 7th graders to learn science, and she's just a dynamic educator. And we certainly celebrate Officer Jennifer Imperato at Ocean Breeze. Seldom a kid gets into school every morning without her greeting and connecting with them, and the relationship she has with our kids across Ocean Breeze is just amazing. And also Kelly Gergen, will celebrate her this evening as Assistant Principal of the Year. She received that award shortly before she was selected to become the leader of our Gardendale Day School for our students with most severe disabilities, and is just doing an admirable job of loving on, serving, and raising up our students at Gardendale. So ultimately, as we've faced, we've realized that it's the people that help our kids that we need to keep in mind every day. That led me to ultimately the recommendation now a few months ago to put before our community an ad valorem tax for the compensation challenges that we face. You know, we've been fortunate. Our state leaders, our governor initiated increasing our beginning teacher salary wage 3 years ago and has helped fund that along the way. And we've made incredible strides in raising the beginning teacher salary for our teachers. You can see here that this year, tonight, the school board will be approving the compensation schedule for our teachers employee group, and our new beginning teacher salary will be $48,725 for this school year. But the challenge that has brought to us is there has not been funding to tackle the realities of wage compression. In other words, our teachers who are above beginning teacher salary that beginning teacher salary is bumping up against their salary. I share with our community when I talk about the what, the why, the hows, is we have master teachers, 15-year teachers who are serving in one classroom in our school right next door to a brand new teacher. That 15-year experienced teacher is doing a great job of establishing routines and systems within the classroom and really embarking on rich ELA and math and science and history learning within the classroom. And as to be expected, our beginning teacher is struggling and likely leaning on that experienced teacher right next door. But what only separates them in salary at this point is several $100s. And we've attempted to tackle that as a district, but we can't keep up with the rate that has occurred and that legislation kind of challenges along the way. And then also impacting or making wage compression a reality is the minimum wage increase to $15. We know that in 2020, the voters of Florida approved raising our minimum wage as a state to $15 an hour over time by 2026. But our legislature this last session accelerated that for government and public school systems. So we were mandated to go to the $15 an hour minimum wage by October 1st. And our legislature provided an increase in the BSA or base student allocation to be able to build that into our budget. But again, the revenue wasn't there to tackle everyone above $15 an hour. And so now we have employee groups that were delineated by pay based on responsibility and supervisory duties that are now at the same exact hourly pay rate. And to be able to address and tackle that requires significant additional revenue. The board's aware that we conducted a study of wage compression through a third party, Carr, Riggs and Ingram. And as they studied that across the district, it became evident very quickly that we were not facing millions of dollars of a process to correct wage compression. It was tens of millions of dollars of an impact for salaries to be able to do that. This slide depicts where our average teacher pay is for Florida and where it ranks across the nation. We have had significant improvements in our beginning teacher salary when compared against other states across the United States, but our average teacher pay has moved very little because it's all been increased from the bottom and the top has not increased. And so as we gave consideration to this recommendation several months ago now, it first came through the lens of our strategic plan alignment, priorities, and bringing forward what we want for our students, what we want for our staff, what we want for our community, and the return on investment for their public schools. And if you dive in and look closely at the strategic plan, particularly Goal 1, academic excellence, I would remind the board and draw our community's attention to Objective A2, to ensure every student is taught by certified, skilled teachers who hold high expectations for all learners. And it takes time to become skilled and an expert in the craft who are able to consistently hold our kids to high expectations. And that's why we've been able to excel as a district, and we want to be able to retain those master teachers that I have already mentioned. Second, Goal 2, exceptional workforce. Our objective E3, to retain a diverse pool of candidates for all classification of positions within Brevard Public Schools. And objective E4, develop and provide long-term compensation and benefits package and benefits for all employees. We know that in today's workforce market, retention is the first strategy to recruitment, or the best strategy to recruitment. And to retain our employees in this ever-increasing competitive workforce market, it has become evident that we have got to be more competitive with the compensation, particularly of our most expertise and experienced employees. Just to emphasize, as you know, Brevard Public Schools has one of the most experienced teacher workforces in Florida who consistently provide high-quality learning opportunities for our kids. However, the national, regional, and local labor shortages are affecting our ability to serve students as critical instructional and operational positions remain unfilled. Funding is needed to increase teacher and staff compensation to continue to recruit, but also retain a high-qualified workforce, which ultimately benefits our kids and continues to give our community a great return on investment. So just to highlight the process, the school board approved the resolution on April 26th to put before our community a ballot item for raising a 1 mil property tax for the operating budget to be dedicated to compensation benefits, student achievement, program enrichment, as well as some classroom technology enhancements. That resolution had to go through the county commission as a validation that we had met all of the statutory requirements that are part of bringing forth a ad valorem millage ballot item, and that was approved on May 19th and has moved forward to the supervisor of elections. Just for clarification, initial revenue is not expected until November, December of 2023. So if on November 8th the voters do approve the ad valorem millage, it would not go into effect until the next tax roll, which would be November of 2023. Included in the resolution before the board, as a reminder to our community, our commitment to a Citizens Oversight Committee, which I will talk about a little bit more in a few minutes, but also acknowledging that charter schools qualify for their proportional allocation of this millage if it is passed by our community. We presented previously, and we'll get into quite a bit more detail here in a moment, but just the big picture, what does the allocation of the millage revenue look like? The anticipated revenue to Brevard Public Schools is projected to be $54 million after the charter school allocation. And the breakdown of the distribution is as follows, as you can see. 80% is devoted and dedicated to compensation and or benefits for teachers and all employee groups. You can see that that's approximately $43 million. That is exclusive of school board, superintendent, and general counsel, just to provide clarification. All employee groups do not include board, superintendent, or general counsel. Student program development, access, expansion, and or support makes up 16% of the allocation, or approximately $8.6 million. I'll show a little bit more closely what that breakdown looks like. And technology at about $2.1 million for the advancement of our Classroom of the Future initiative. Right now, that's very slow going, and we wanted to prioritize the experiences that our students receive in the classroom, but also it is a recruitment and a retention tool for our teachers in the classroom as well, as we're able to provide them state-of-the-art technology to enhance the instructional delivery for their students. So here you see the plan or the allocation of Brevard Public Schools millage revenue. Again, the largest bucket being compensation and benefits at 80% of the overall allocation. $35.9 million would be specifically dedicated to compensation and benefits for budgeted salary positions. That would be broken down further by percentage of the employee groups that make up the budgeted salaries for the district. By that I mean we have 3 employee groups. That's our teacher employee group, our hourly or our certified employee group, and then the non-bargaining, predominantly administrative employee group. The $35.9 million would be distributed proportionally to those employee groups based on the percent of salary that that group makes up in our current budget for the district. Then you can see we also have 10.5% of that bucket set aside for supplements. So what are supplements? Those are extra duty assignments that teachers or other staff or community members take on throughout our schools and across the district. Things like department chair, social media manager, football coach, basketball coach, volleyball coach. Certain clubs and club sponsors receive supplements for those extra assignments as well. Through our study and evaluation of our supplement schedule, it is very clear that we are well below the market value or the market compensation for those physicians, and this would allow us to make a significant improvement in our supplement compensation for those duties. Personal story, when I was a high school varsity soccer coach, I could have made a much better hourly wage at the time I spent with my athletes, which was an invaluable experience. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. But I would have made more money doing any other minimum wage job in the community. And I know all of our coaches commit a tremendous amount of their extra personal time, and we want to do everything we can to compensate them as well. And then also recognizing the challenges we have with recruitment and retention, we have set aside approximately $2.8 million for specific employment incentives for recruitment and retention. Then moving into student programs, that 16% bucket, approximately $5.2 million, is dedicated to programs such as CTE, performing arts, STEM initiatives, athletics and enrichments. These would be additional dollars for those programs to further them and enrich them on behalf of our students, as well as school-based additional staffing opportunities, looking at early childhood as well as student support services, and evaluating what our needs are for our schools when we're hopefully when we are presented with the revenue to be able to do this for our schools and our kids. And then again, you can see the 100% of the technology bucket is for the Classrooms of the Future initiative. And we'll post on our website more specifically what the Classrooms of the Future initiative looks like. Russell Cheatham and his team have done a great job of remaining current in practice, instructional practice, out there in the world of the ever-changing world of technology, and have really put together a great plan for phasing in our Classrooms of the Future initiative. The problem is right now it's on a many-year implementation schedule. This would significantly accelerate that implementation with the allocation of a little over $2 million a year for at least the next 4 years. I want to spend a few minutes talking about Citizens Financial Oversight Committee. This is not a new concept for Brevard Public Schools. We committed to an independent Citizens Oversight Committee when the community favorably approved the sales surtax initiative. And that current structure has been in place now for about 8 years and has been very successful. We have consistently received positive audit outcomes from the audits twice a year of the sales surtax initiative. That audit is done independent of Brevard Public Schools. It's presented to the Independent Citizens Oversight Committee and then ultimately presented to the Audit Committee that the board has representation on. And we love to see green checks from the audits. And on every semi-annual audit for sales surtax, there's the potential of 3 green checks. And we have consistently, over the last 8 years, received those 3 green checks through every audit. In addition to that, the ICOC provides the board an annual update on their experience and validation of expenditures for committed priorities, or what has been presented and committed to the community as well as to the board. And every year, the ICOC committee has come to the board and given a very favorable report to the management, the oversight, and the expenditures as part of the sales surtax initiative. I take the time to say that because, one, we're not strangers to this level of accountability, and we welcome it, and we absolutely will make it a part of this initiative if our community commits to this with us. And the Citizens Oversight Committee, which will be a separate entity for strictly the Millage initiative, will have the same reporting structure. The mission will be to provide oversight to ensure proper fiscal stewardship of operating funds provided by the 1 mil increase in the operating ad valorem millage. Membership will be similar to that of the sales surtax ICOC, comprised of no less than 7 and no more than 11 members. Meetings will be held at least quarterly or more frequent as needed or called by the chair of the Oversight Committee. And their areas of responsibility to provide that oversight, review expenditure reports produced by the district, ensure that 100% of the proceeds are expended only for the purposes set forth in the ballot, make reports to the board and superintendent, which include but not limited to a statement indicating whether the district is in compliance with the requirements of the ballot, receive and review copies of a district audit regarding the proceeds related to that ballot. You know, one of the common questions I have asked when I'm out in the community about these funds is if the community approves the millage, do the dollars assessed in Brevard stay in Brevard? And the answer is a resounding yes. The reason that is a funny question to ask, you would assume, but we've presented before that the millage that is assessed in Brevard County towards the Florida Education Finance Plan or program, that actually goes to the state, and the state puts that in a large bucket for statewide public school funding, and Brevard actually receives back just a little less than every dollar we send up for Brevard Public Schools. In the case of the millage, every dollar assessed here stays here and would go into this initiative. So I want to take a few minutes to talk through what is a mill and what would the average family expect to realize with a mill increase. A 1 mil essentially is $1 for every $1,000 of home taxable value. So for every $100,000 of taxable value, and I'll talk a little bit more about the difference between taxable value and market value, is approximately $100. The median taxable value of a home, of a single family home in Brevard County is $153,000 approximately. That was just recently reassessed based on the tax appraisers website and their database of taxable value. So that is a very current number for Brevard County based on the most updated database from the county. That would translate to that home value of $153.10 per year, or approximately 42 cents a day. And what I mentioned a moment ago, the difference between taxable value and market value. If you look at your property tax roll or assessment you received probably within the last month or so, you look halfway down that tax roll, you'll see assessed taxable value, and right next to it another box that says current market value. And at least on my tax notice, my market value is significantly higher than my taxable value. And I remind our community that the reason for that is the Florida Save Our Homes legislation, where taxable value can only increase a maximum of 3% if market value has increased at a greater rate. And we certainly know that across our community in Florida and likely across the country that property values have gone up quite a bit significantly over the last year or even the last 5 years, but the taxable value of the home has not risen at anywhere near that same rate as you've stayed in your home. The board and the community has seen this slide before. It was part of our budget presentation over the last several weeks, but it does a nice job of depicting what has been the historical reality of our millage rates in Brevard or in the state of Florida for the last 12 years. And you can see that there was a high watermark school district millage assessment back in 2012 of 8.1 mils and has decreased since then to now 5.495 mils for this current tax roll. That's a cumulative millage. 1.5 of that is for the capital outlay or the capital budget of the district. And I know at least some board members remember that the capital millage several years ago, not long before 2011, was actually 2 mills, but it was reduced by the legislature down to 1.5 mills, and it has remained there for at least the last 12 years. Here you have a depiction or a graphic, if you will, representing the school districts across, counties across the state that have passed a millage similar to the one proposed to our voters in November. And you can see that several, at least a few surrounding counties to Brevard have utilized this revenue source for their school districts and done some of the very same initiatives that I've already proposed to the district, or to the school board. Just for clarification, a reminder, the millage would last for 4 years unless extended by the voters. So every 4 years, this initiative would have to go before the voters for it to continue. I'll close just by putting up the ballot language that will be on the November 8th ballot. And give the board a chance just to review it. I know you've seen it before, but also for our community. It will be titled the Ad Valorem Millage to Increase Teacher Pay and Other Purposes. The description includes for increasing teacher and staff pay, funding for technical training for students, and other similar purposes. So the school district of Brevard County authorize a 1 mil ad valorem millage for 4 years to ensure student achievement, recruit and retain teachers and staff with competitive salaries, and distribute funds as statute requires to charter schools based on their proportionate share of district enrollment, with all expenditures to be reviewed by an independent Citizens Oversight Committee. With that, I welcome any questions for clarification or discussion from the board at this time, ultimately requesting board consensus of the allocation and distribution of the buckets and how they would be utilized for the millage as we continue to walk this out and move forward. I would acknowledge that the funds that would be distributed to employee groups with a collective bargaining unit, the final distribution of dollars to employees would have to be mutually agreed upon, tentatively agreed between the collective bargaining units and the school board, ultimately coming to the school board for final approval. Also, we are this week launching our district's website to provide our community additional information of everything I have shared here, as well as other information. Includes a FAQ, frequently asked questions. It'll include an email so our community can send an email requesting any clarification, any additional information that might be helpful to them. We want our community, every resident, every citizen in Brevard to be fully informed of the proposal that we're bringing before them, and want them to feel assured in the moment of making that decision when they go to the ballot box on November 8th. Madam Chair, I turn it over to the board.
Board members have comments or questions? Ms. Jenkins?
Thank you, Dr. Mullins. I appreciate you addressing the TSIA, so the teacher salary increase allocation, and it's wonderful that we increase that starting teacher salary, like you said, but we still remain, as a state, 48th in the nation for average teacher salary. So we have only 2 states that reward experience and professionalism of educators less than the state of Florida in the entire nation. And it puts this challenge and burden on districts and their communities that they serve to fix and address that issue themselves. And I appreciate you bringing up the fact that the taxes that we pay here get sent back up to the state and reallocated back to us a little bit less than we put in. And I appreciate you saying that this, if it is approved, would stay here in Brevard. But I just want to double down on something. Those taxes that go up to the state, they don't just come back to us, they come back to us with handcuffs and restrictions on how we can spend that money. And just a few quick examples that are kind of easy for layman terms. For that teacher salary increase allocation, for every $1 we give an experienced veteran teacher, we have to give 75 cents to a new teacher. So just further exacerbating that wage compression. And in addition to that teacher salary increase allocation, any funds that the district wants to spend on raises for their staff and their teachers, we have to provide 25% more to a teacher who is not on a grandfathered or a more experienced teacher's contract. And so it makes it really difficult for us to even try and tackle those issues, even if we had the money here to do it. So I just think it's something that's really important for our public to be aware of.
Thank you. You are correct.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Ms. Campbell?
So thank you for giving all this information. Thank you for especially explaining, walking through the millage and what that looks like. So there was a slide that says the plan that has the paragraphs. Under student programs, the 40% for school-based additional staffing, early childhood, student support services. I know not all of that is completely fleshed out, but we had talked at one time about adding potentially some additional instructional assistance in the early childhood range. Is that the part of the bucket that would go towards that?
Yes, it would. And,
Okay.
and, you know, just to acknowledge, the plan reveals exactly where the buckets are, the revenue would have to be expended. I'm not bringing before the board yet a recommendation of the finite details of
Right.
each of those smaller buckets because, one, we don't know that we have the revenue
Right.
to utilize, and two, it'd be a little presumptuous to know that our greatest need come next school year is the same as it would be today. So I anticipate if the millage passes on November 8th, we will begin developing and doing needs assessment across the district within these established parameters of where the greatest needs are and bringing those priorities to the board in the spring in preparation for next school year. And we have to be aware that the revenue received for this initiative at the earliest would be November of 2023. So to make August commitments, particularly for additional staffing, we'll have to weigh out,
Right.
can we manage that expenditure before we have the revenue directly? So we're actually working through that now, and we're optimistic that we'll be able to meet those timelines, that cash flow, if you will. But those are things that are a bit premature to finite out right now, not knowing exactly what our situation would be.
Totally understood and appreciated, and I certainly don't want us to get the cart before the horse because we have to have voter approval first. I just wondered if that's the bucket. And I also understand and appreciate that. Along with teachers and bus drivers, I know IAs have been one of our other top priority areas that we are dealing with staffing shortages. And if we're not going to be able to fill those positions that we currently have to add another, however many couple of dozen IAs to go in that's totally understood.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to see if that was the place
It is.
in the future. I'm glad you guys are going to do some more, just kind of spelling out what that classrooms of the future looks like, because it's kind of just this term that people aren't familiar with. But I just was thinking, we had conversation before sometime in the past that a lot of and maybe it was Mr. Susan that brought it up, I can't remember, or Ms. Jenkins, that a lot of our college grads who've been doing teacher prep programs, or even if they're not coming from a teacher prep program, but they're just college students working in other fields that end up becoming teachers, they're used to working with technology, and then they're walking to a classroom with, I think we've gotten rid of our last schools that just have chalkboards, but just a whiteboard and some dry erase markers. It's very different. And so if they're walking into environment, and I'm not talking about recent grads, but ones who've been graduating and coming into our schools to work over the last at least a half a dozen years, I would say at least, are used to that kind of technology. And so to be able to walk into a classroom that has the things that they've already been used to using, either in a teacher prep program or some other program, I think is valuable. Not to mention that when our students leave the workforce, whether they're headed to college or they're headed into multiple careers, they're going to be using that kind of technology in the workforce, in presentations, and in just their day-to-day work. So, to have that, along with the computers that we're already providing through other initiatives, I think that's really important. On the slide where you talked about the median, and I'm so glad that we got the most updated, the median taxable value being $153,100. Do you know if that includes the homestead exemption? Because $25,000 of the homestead exemption does apply to school tax rates. Do you know if that was before or after that?
I believe that's after the homestead exemption.
Okay.
I'll double check and clarify and
Right.
let the board know. And we'll clarify that on the slide when we post it to our website.
Okay, sounds
But
good.
I'm almost positive that's after.
It's after, okay. All right, so that was all.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Mr. Susan? Got anything?
Oh, good.
Ms. McDougall? Just a couple of questions for you, Dr. Mullins, for me, more for our public than for my knowledge. But, one of the slides that you have added to the presentation, I think it's a great slide, is the other counties that have millage already. Can you speak just briefly to the significance of that?
Yeah, the reality is those districts have leveraged local dollars to make them more competitive as employment destination. And so we are, the reality is, you look at Indian River and Orange County, virtually any resident in Brevard can access either Indian River or Orange County, and they have employment incentives we can't compete with right now. And so that's what we're experiencing. We are experiencing teachers and some of our most experienced who are going to these other locations, particularly to bolster their income for calculation of retirement. And I'm very pleased to share that if this becomes a reality for our teachers, it too, the supplement that would come to our teachers would contribute to their salary towards the retirement calculation. So not only does it increase their immediate income, it increases their retirement benefit as well, making it almost a double competitive proposition. So we will be able to keep folks who live in Brevard, who could teach in Brevard, staying in Brevard. But it also translates to our bus drivers. So we'll be able to be more competitive to surrounding employers. I don't like to call out our other employment opportunities, but when Walmart Distribution Center opened like 2 miles from our largest bus depot on 520, we got hit with a significant departure because our drivers could go there and make a considerably higher hourly wage. This initiative,
I took a picture, and half of them were our bus drivers.
yeah, I remember the groundbreaking. I know him, I know her.
Yep,
I know.
that's it. It's a big old, yeah.
But this initiative, we anticipate will level the playing field for us in terms of competitive wage for our employees across all employee groups. Really being a game changer for us in the landscape of competitive wage and salary.
Thank you. Another question that I've gotten a couple of times from some of our folks here in the district, and that is, why can't we use sales tax or impact fees to address our wage compression concerns?
Yeah, I receive that question often when I'm out in the community as well. Well, impact fees, we heard earlier, have to be devoted and dedicated strictly to the cost of increasing student stations. So that it's a very limited revenue source strictly for capital growth and capital enhancement or the payoff of debt associated with increasing student stations. Sales surtax can only be used for capital expenditures. We can't use it for operating budget. That is dictated and legislated in state law. And so we cannot take sales surtax dollars and put them in our operating budget, which is where we pay salaries from. At best, we can pay some salaries out of sales surtax for the jobs that get the sales surtax projects done in 100%. So we have, for example, a handful of project managers that oversee and manage our sales surtax capital projects paid out of the sales surtax, but that's the extent of what the law allows us to do. We cannot supplant operating budget with sales surtax revenue.
And along kind of those same lines, what I hear is we just got all these federal dollars into the schools in Florida. Why can't those be used to address our compression issues?
Well, 2 reasons. Number one, they're short term. Those dollars have to be utilized by September of 2024. So that's less than 2 years. Well, it's about 2 years away from now. Those dollars come with a lot of parameters and restrictions. The largest lion's share of which need to be dedicated and devoted to enriching and elevating student academic recovery and growth. Certainly, some dollars have been used for bonuses for staff. I shouldn't say bonuses, premium pay, but that is a non-recurring source of revenue, and as such, they don't count towards retirement. Even when we're able to provide a premium pay, one-time compensation to employees, it does not qualify for the retirement consideration, but because the millage would be a recurring source for at least 4 years, potentially longer, it does meet the state qualifications as retirement qualifying for all employees, whether it's a teacher, bus driver, cafeteria worker, media specialist, et cetera.
Thank you. Another thing that I've heard a few times is, we have increased our starting teacher salary significantly. We're doing sign-on bonuses and all sorts of things to recruit new teachers. Are we seeing an influx of new teachers at a greater rate than our more senior teachers are retiring? Are we seeing that this increase in the base teacher pay is having the impact that I think we hoped it would have of bringing lots of people into the field of education?
We are narrowing the gap of vacancies, but we are not making we're continuing to realize considerable workforce vacancies. In the teacher ranks, my team hates it when I make these kind of speculations, particularly on camera, so I'm going to do a big disclaimer. This is a gut. This is what it feels like is happening. But of the teachers I hear from that are leaving our schools, there are many who are leaving in that 10 to 16, 18-year range because there's favorable employment opportunities in the private sector, and they still have a lot of work life left. So stepping out of the Florida retirement system at 15 years still provides them time to come up with an alternative. Teachers who are hitting 30 years when they have their full retirement benefit eligible are choosing to leave, versus they can extend for 5-7 more years through the drop extension program. They're choosing to leave earlier because we're not keeping up with the competitive salary alternatives. So again, that's my kind of anecdotal observation of what we're facing, but I suspect I would not be far off from what's really happening out there. It's, our teacher who's at 15 years, who can go work for private sector space industry and get a $10,000 to $20,000 immediate increase in annual income. We can't compete with that.
Right. And then just 3 things that I would like to highlight for anyone who is watching or paying attention. Number 1, you mentioned that the revenue will not actually come to us until November or December. And there's been lots of conversation about, the increased costs that we're all experiencing right now, although we've started to see some of that begin to taper off. Not only would we not receive that revenue until November or December, but of 2023, but our residents also are not going to be paying that until we get them August, right? That we would get our tax bills of August of 2023 is when residents would first be. We get the notice in August, the bill in November, yeah.
Right.
So, yeah,
Right.
so we're looking at not impact to pocketbooks today or tomorrow or.
Correct. It's a year out.
And then a lot of people have said, why are we not giving specifics? And I think you gave this answer, but for the lay interpretation, we can't tell our public today what each individual employee is going to receive from those dollars because it all has to go through the bargaining process.
That's
Correct.
correct. And we're actually engaged in conversations right now about beginning that process with both collective bargaining units. So I anticipate we will be able to tell our employees what is negotiated before November 8th, what they could anticipate if the initiative is approved. So we're in the process of doing that, but we haven't officially started that process, but I think we meet with the Brevard Federation of Teachers tomorrow for first discussions, and we're in the process of negotiations with our 1010 IUAPT employee group currently for raises for this year. And then they have requested to immediately begin discussions on the potential millage distribution for their employee group.
Thank you. And then just the last comment that I will make, going back to the slide that had the millage over the years that has been assessed by the state, we have declined from the high in 2011 by 2.6 percentage points on our millage. And so I think it's important to pay attention to that, because the reality is, if the state had not decreased our millage and had just held steady on our millage, we would have no need to go to our community and ask them to give us additional dollars. And we're not asking for 2.6, which is what we lost. We're just asking for the 1. So I think that's an important perspective for us to continue to share as well. Anybody else have anything for Dr. Mullins on millage? All right. Thank you, Dr. Mullins. We
Just for
appreciate it.
formality, just want to confirm that the board supports the allocation and distribution of the funds as it's been presented, and your support moving forward.
Mr. Susan? Good?
What?
Miss-
The allocation of what was presented today, the buckets of percentages.
80%.
Oh, what you guys have been saying.
Yeah. You're good, Ms. McDougall? Good?
Can we just put somewhere big on the front of the website, the board doesn't get any of this, the superintendent doesn't get any of this, Paul doesn't get any of this, so, especially Paul, put Paul's face on it. I'm just kidding.
Ms. Campbell, you're good?
I'm good.
Ms. Jenkins, you're good?
Yeah.
I'm good.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome. Thank you. All right. Does any board member have anything else that we need to discuss during the workshop portion? No. All right. There being no further business, this meeting is now adjourned.